The morning sun cast long shadows across the Fort Henderson military shooting range as Harold Thompson, 72 years old, stepped through the entrance carrying a worn leather rifle case that had seen better decades. His gray hair was neatly combed, his posture still straight despite his age, and his weathered hands showed the steady precision of someone who had handled firearms for most of his life. The range buzzed with activity as younger soldiers, weekend warriors, and shooting enthusiasts filled the lanes, their modern equipment gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Staff Sergeant Rick Morrison, a cocky 30-something range supervisor with perfectly pressed fatigues, looked up from his clipboard as Harold approached the check-in counter. The old man's simple khaki pants and faded polo shirt made him stand out among the tactical gear and military uniforms surrounding him. "You sure you're in the right place, Pops?" Morrison smirked, his voice loud enough to catch the attention of nearby shooters. "This isn't exactly a retirement home activity center." Harold smiled politely, setting his case down gently. "I'd like to reserve a lane for the morning, if that's possible." "A lane?" Morrison laughed, glancing at the group of young soldiers behind him who had stopped their conversation to watch. "What are you planning to shoot with, Grandpa? A BB gun?" The soldiers chuckled, and one of them, Private Jake Stevens, stepped forward with a grin. "Hey, old man, you might want to try the indoor range downtown. They've got those paper targets with the big circles. Might be more your speed." Harold opened his case slowly, revealing a standard-issue M1 Garand rifle that looked like it had been meticulously maintained but was clearly from another era. The sight of the vintage weapon only fueled more laughter from the crowd. "Oh man, look at that antique," Stevens continued, nudging his buddy. "What's next? You gonna pull out a musket? That thing belongs in a museum, not on a military range." Morrison leaned over the counter, his condescending tone growing sharper. "Listen, Pops, I don't think you understand what kind of facility this is. We've got precision shooters here training for real missions. This isn't a place for weekend hobbyists to play with their grandpas worth souvenirs." The range had grown quieter as more people turned to watch the confrontation. Harold stood calmly, his hands resting on his rifle case, showing no signs of anger or frustration despite the escalating mockery. "That rifle probably hasn't been fired since Korea," another voice called out from the back. "Hope it doesn't blow up in your face, Gramps." Harold looked up at Morrison with steady, patient eyes. "I understand this is a professional facility, Sergeant. I just need one lane, and I'll stay out of everyone's way. I can pay the range fee." Morrison shook his head dramatically. "The range fee is the least of our concerns. What happens when that relic jams up or you can't handle the recoil? We've got liability issues here. Plus, look at those shaky hands." Harold glanced down at his hands, which showed only the slightest tremor that came with age, then back up at Morrison. "I think I can manage." "Manage?" Stevens burst out laughing. "Old-timer, some of us here are preparing for deployment. We're training with equipment that costs more than your Social Security check. Your little antique show is going to be a distraction." The crowd had grown larger now, with shooters from other lanes walking over to see what the commotion was about. Most wore expressions of amusement, watching what they assumed would be either a quick exit by the old man or an embarrassing display of incompetence. "Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Your comment helps our community grow stronger." "Thanks, and let's get back to the story." Harold reached into his wallet and placed two $20 bills on the counter. "For the lane rental and ammunition," he said quietly. Morrison stared at the money for a moment, then at Harold's determined but respectful expression. Something in the old man's eyes suggested this wasn't going to end the way everyone expected, but Morrison's pride was too invested in the public spectacle he had created. "Fine," Morrison said, snatching the bills. "Lane 12, all the way at the end. But when you can't hit the broad side of a barn, don't come crying to us. And if that museum piece malfunctions, you're responsible for any damage." As Harold picked up his case and walked toward lane 12, the whispers and chuckles followed him down the line of shooting positions. What none of them knew was that Harold Thompson wasn't just any retired veteran. He was Master Sergeant Harold Thompson, former member of the Army's elite sniper school, with a service record that included 3 tours in Vietnam, 2 in Desert Storm, and training assignments that had produced some of the military's finest marksmen over a 30-year career. Harold had kept quiet about his background since retiring 12 years ago. He lived modestly in a small apartment, volunteered at the VA hospital, and rarely spoke about his military service to anyone. The only time he felt truly at peace was during his monthly visits to various shooting ranges. Here the familiar weight of a rifle and the discipline of precision shooting brought back memories of when his skills had meant the difference between life and death for countless soldiers under his protection. At Lane 12, Harold methodically unpacked his equipment. His movements were deliberate and practiced, each action flowing into the next with the kind of muscle memory that never fully fades. He inserted 8 rounds into the M1 Garand's in-block clip with smooth efficiency, the metallic sound of ammunition sliding into place barely audible over the ongoing chatter from the other lanes. This should be entertaining, Stevens called out to his friends, who had positioned themselves where they could watch the show. $20 says he can't even hit the target. You're on, another soldier replied. I'll bet he drops the rifle after the first shot. Morrison had positioned himself at the range master's booth where he could observe all the lanes, but his attention was focused primarily on Lane 12. D already decided that this would make a good story to tell later about the day some confused old man wandered onto a military range and made a fool of himself. Harold adjusted the target distance to 300 yards, a setting that immediately caught the attention of nearby shooters. Most people warming up started at 100 yards, maybe 200 at most. 300 yards was what experienced marksmen used for serious precision work. 300 yards? Stevens laughed. The old guy's really going for it. This is going to be hilarious. Harold shouldered the rifle, his stance automatically falling into the textbook position he had taught to hundreds of students over the years. His breathing slowed, his heart rate dropped, and the familiar focus that had once made him legendary among military snipers began to take hold. The first shot rang out, sharp and clean. Through his binoculars, Harold could see the bullet hole that had appeared dead center in the target's bullseye, a perfect 10-ring hit. He worked the bolt smoothly and fired again. Another perfect center hit. The laughter from the nearby lanes began to fade as shooters noticed the precision of Harold's shots. Morrison picked up his own binoculars, focusing on Lane 12's target with growing confusion. No way, Stevens muttered, borrowing binoculars from another shooter. Those are just lucky shots. Harold continued firing with methodical precision. Third shot, dead center. Fourth shot, touching the edge of the previous hole. Fifth shot, so close to perfect center that it was impossible to distinguish from his first shot without magnification. By now, the entire range had grown noticeably quieter. Conversations had stopped mid-sentence as shooters began to realize they were witnessing something extraordinary. Harold's M1 Garand, the so-called antique, was producing results that most of them couldn't achieve with their state-of-the-art equipment. Master Sergeant William Cruz, a range instructor who had been working with a group of advanced students, walked over to Morrison's booth. Rick, are you seeing this? Who was that shooter in Lane 12? Morrison was staring through his binoculars, his earlier cockiness replaced by bewilderment. Just some old guy who wandered in. Said he wanted to shoot for the morning. That's not just some old guy, Cruz said, his voice filled with professional respect. Look at that grouping. Look at his form. That's military precision at the highest level. Harold fired his sixth shot, the metallic ping of the empty and block clip ejecting from the rifle echoing across the now silent range. He reloaded with the same smooth efficiency, never breaking his concentration or changing his stance. The seventh shot hit so close to the center that several shooters had to use scopes to verify it wasn't the same hole as his previous shots. The eighth and final shot of his second clip landed within a grouping so tight that the entire cluster could have been covered by a quarter. Jesus Christ, whispered Private Martinez, one of Stevens' friends who had been preparing to mock Harold just minutes earlier. I've never seen shooting like that outside of championship competitions. Word was spreading through the range faster than Harold could reload. Shooters from the pistol ranges and tactical training areas began filtering over to see what was causing the commotion. Range officers who had been busy with their own duties found reasons to walk past Lane 12 to get a glimpse of the shooting. Harold continued his methodical process, oblivious to the growing audience. Third clip loaded, target confirmed at 300 yards, breathing controlled, and focus absolute. 9 more shots, each one placed with surgical precision in the center of the target. Staff Sergeant Morrison found himself walking down toward Lane 12, his clipboard forgotten in the booth. He had been running this range for 8 years and had seen thousands of shooters, from beginners to experts to military champions. What he was witnessing defied his understanding of what was possible with standard equipment at that distance. "Sir," Morrison said quietly, approaching Harold as he reloaded for his fourth clip. The mocking tone from earlier had been replaced by something approaching reverence. "Sir, I need to ask, what's your background?" Harold looked up from his rifle, his expression still calm and focused. "Just a veteran, Sergeant. Enjoying a morning at the range." "Sir, with respect, nobody shoots like that just from being a veteran. That's world-class marksmanship. Are you active duty? Reserves? Competition shooter?" Before Harold could answer, Master Sergeant Cruz arrived at Lane 12, followed by several other range instructors and a growing crowd of curious shooters. Cruz studied Harold's target through high-powered binoculars, shaking his head in amazement. "Sir, I've been instructing marksmanship for 15 years, Cruz said. "I've worked with Olympic champions and military snipers. What you're doing right now? This is the kind of shooting that gets talked about for years." Harold nodded politely and returned his attention to his rifle. Fourth clip, 8 more shots, each one adding to a grouping that was becoming the stuff of legend. The crowd had grown to include nearly everyone on the range, with people calling friends and colleagues to come witness what was happening. Private Stevens, who had started the morning ready to mock an old man with outdated equipment, found himself studying Harold's technique with the intensity of a student trying to learn from a master. "The way he controls his breathing," Stevens murmured to Martinez. "The way he settles into position. I've never seen anything like it." "That rifle," Martinez replied. "It's not the equipment. It's the shooter. Look at his hands. Steady as a rock now that he's in his element." Harold finished his fourth clip and set the rifle down carefully, stepping back from the shooting position for the first time since he had started. The range had fallen into complete silence, with dozens of people watching his every movement. "Sir," Morrison said, his voice carrying the kind of respect usually reserved for senior officers, "I need to verify something. What you just did. If I'm reading these measurements correctly, you may have just broken our range record." Harold looked mildly surprised. "Range record?" Cruz nodded, consulting a chart he had retrieved from the range office. "Sir, our current record for precision shooting at 300 yards has stood for 8 years. 32 shots, average grouping of 2.1 inches. You just fired 32 shots with an average grouping that looks like it might be under 1 inch." The crowd pressed closer as Cruz and Morrison began the official measurement process. Using precision calipers and measuring tools, they carefully documented each shot's placement on Harold's target. The whispers and murmurs of the crowd grew more excited as the measurements were recorded. "0.87 inches, Cruz announced, his voice carrying across the silent range. "Average grouping of 0.87 inches at 300 yards. That's not just a new range record. That's the kind of shooting that gets you into record books." The crowd erupted in applause, but Harold seemed almost embarrassed by the attention. He began packing his rifle with the same methodical care he had shown throughout the morning. "Sir, wait," Morrison said, his earlier antagonism completely forgotten. "Can I ask, what unit did you serve with? Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Harold paused in his packing, looking around at the faces surrounding him. All of them showed the same expression of professional respect and genuine curiosity. These were people who understood firearms and marksmanship, and they recognized they had witnessed something extraordinary. "I served for 30 years, Harold said quietly. "Sniper school, various training assignments. Spent most of my career teaching others how to shoot." "Teaching others?" Cruz's eyes widened. "Sir, are you Master Sergeant Harold Thompson?" The name sent a ripple of recognition through the crowd, particularly among the older non-commissioned officers and instructors. Harold looked surprised that anyone would know his name. "You know me?" "Know you?" Cruz laughed with amazement. "Sir, half the sniper instructors in the Army trained under you or learned from people who did. Your training manuals are still used at Fort Benning. You're a legend in the marksmanship community." Stevens stepped forward, his face red with embarrassment. "Sir, I owe you an apology. What I said earlier was completely out of line. I had no idea. None of us did," Morrison added quickly. "Sir, I was completely disrespectful. If I had known." Harold held up a hand, his expression kind but firm. "You didn't know because I didn't tell you. I'm not here as Master Sergeant Thompson. I'm just a retired veteran who enjoys shooting. But that doesn't excuse the assumptions you made about someone based on their age and appearance." The crowd had grown silent again. But this time it was the respectful silence of people receiving an important lesson rather than the awkward silence of people watching a spectacle. Every veteran who walks through that door, Harold continued, every person who wants to learn about firearms or improve their shooting, deserves the same respect and opportunity. You never know what someone's background is, what they've accomplished, what they might teach you if you give them a chance. Morrison nodded seriously. Yes, sir. You're absolutely right, and it won't happen again. Harold finished packing his rifle and closed the case. I had a good morning here. Thank you for the use of your range. Sir, Cruz said, would you consider coming back? Maybe doing some instruction? We have advanced students who could learn incredible amounts from someone with your background. Harold smiled, the first genuinely warm expression he had shown all morning. I might consider that. I do miss teaching. As Harold prepared to leave, the crowd began to disperse, but not before several people approached him individually to shake his hand, ask for advice, or simply express their respect for what they had witnessed. The young soldiers who had mocked him earlier waited until the crowd had thinned before approaching. Sir, Stevens said, extending his hand, I learned something important today, and it wasn't about shooting. Thank you. Harold shook his hand firmly. We all make assumptions sometimes, son. The important thing is learning from them. As Harold walked toward the exit, Morrison caught up with him one final time. Sir, about that range record, we'd like to make it official if you don't mind. Put up a plaque with your achievement. It might remind people that excellence comes in many forms. Harold considered this for a moment, then nodded. That would be fine, Sergeant. But make sure the plaque mentions that respect and humility are just as important as marksmanship skills. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Harold Thompson left Fort Henderson Military Shooting Range that morning the same way he had arrived, quietly, without fanfare, carrying his worn leather rifle case. But he left behind a range full of people who had learned something profound about assumptions, respect, and the danger of judging others based on appearances. The plaque that went up the following week read, Range Precision Record, Master Sergeant Harold Thompson, read, 300 yards, 0.87-inch average grouping. Excellence has no age limit. Respect has no exceptions. Word of what happened that morning spread through the military community faster than official communications. The story became legendary not just for the incredible marksmanship display, but for the lesson it taught about humility, respect, and recognizing that true expertise often comes in unexpected packages. Harold returned to the range the following month, not as a record-breaking marksman seeking a 10 tie-in, but as Master Sergeant Thompson, instructor, ready to pass on 30 years of knowledge to a new generation of shooters who had learned the importance of approaching every person with respect and every lesson with an open mind. The quiet veteran had spoken louder than any words through his act. Irons, proving that sometimes the most powerful statement is made not through confrontation, but through the undeniable demonstration of excellence earned through decades of dedication, service, and quiet professionalism.